in this video, I would like to discuss should we go for an economic retaliation against China, or trade ban, or this banning of these apps. All these things, is it a right move? Yes, a lot of sentiments are there. Nationalistic sentiments are here in India. We are very upset about China attacking our soldiers. We lost 20 soldiers in the Galwan Valley region. We are very upset. But what is that we can do against China, and should we actually go ahead with this kind of an economic retaliation? And yes, if these apps are if apps are a security threat to India, definitely we should look in that angle. We should be banning that. But had it been a security threat, why didn't we ban it before? We did not ban it before. Now we are banning 59 apps. We are banning. So security threat could be an issue, but the primary reason, I don't think security reason is the primary reason why we banned a whole lot of Chinese apps. So if it is precisely because of security reason, there is no harm. But if there is other angle, like if you think that we can hurt China, and because of which China will be learning a couple of lessons because of that, I seriously doubt whether this is going to happen or not. So a couple of points I would like to remind you in this context is, should we, now the discussion here is, should we go for an economic retaliation? Should we go for it's like a strike, it's a digital strike, that is what our minister was saying. Should we go for this kind of is it actually going to help? It's very easy, it can create some sentiments in India. A nationalistic fever can be there. We can say, yes, we are teaching Chinese a couple of lessons, but I seriously doubt whether we are actually going to teach China any lesson or not. First of all, one big argument by people who wants to have a ban on Chinese trade or imposing some tax on the Chinese goods is, extra tax on the Chinese goods is, there is a huge trade deficit between India and China. In 2019, we have seen that almost $90 billion worth bilateral trade, out of which $74 billion are China exporting items to India, and India exported just $16 billion, $16.5 billion worth items to China. So definitely there is a huge trade deficit. Now many people are immediately saying that this is bad for the country, but please remember, trade deficits are not always bad. If with a particular country, if you have a trade deficit, that does not mean that there is a big problem. It does not mean that our economy is weak or worse off and the Chinese economy is very good or anything. So for example, we have trade surplus with US, we have trade surplus with UK, we have trade surplus with Netherlands. That does not mean that our economy is better off than these countries, or we have trade deficit with at least 22 major countries of the world, including China, including France, Germany, Nigeria, South Africa, United Arab Emirates, the UAE, Qatar, Russia, South Korea, Japan, Vietnam, Indonesia. These are some of the countries with which we have trade deficit. That does not mean that our economy is very bad. So trade deficit should not be a criteria. See, why are we doing trade? We are doing more trade from from China, mainly because we are getting cheap goods from China. So we are able to get a cheaper one. So suppose we are getting Chinese AC, which is much cheaper than the Japanese AC, and if it is performing by another the same, and we Indians are getting benefit of that cheap product. So the cheap goods and the more import may not be bad, but yes, if we have trade deficit with every country, if there is a huge trade deficit, overall trade deficit of India, if it is much higher, if our imports are much higher than our export, then it can be a matter of concern. We should try to increase our export. We have to strengthen our economy. We have to strengthen our manufacturing sector. We have to strengthen our production, our yield, our productivity, our profitability, so that we will be able to export more and reduce the import. That is possible. So if there is a huge trade deficit, overall trade deficit, we should be a bit concerned. But we should remember, at this point of time, we have more than $500 billion worth foreign exchange reserve. And our overall trade deficit, of course, there is current account deficit, but overall we don't have that kind of a deficit. We have surplus. I mean, we should not be unduly worried about this trade deficit. Of course, if Yes, I mean, if there is an overall trade deficit, it is all the countries, and if it is increasing and all, we should be looking at it. But otherwise, we should not be unduly worried about the trade deficit with China alone. We should be seeing in the overall picture. We should try to increase trade with China. We should try to increase exports to China. That is true. But we should not be unduly worried about that. So that is first point. Second point I would like to add here is, if we are trying to ban these cheap Chinese goods from being imported, the finished goods, or even as I was mentioning in some other video, see, if the China is able to export ingredients, intermediary goods to India, so for ingredients for pharmaceuticals, ingredients for antibiotics, and it will hurt our poor the maximum. Otherwise this poor would have been getting this. Suppose an AC machine, if it is a Chinese AC is worth only 20,000 rupees, and if a Japanese AC is worth 25,000 rupees, so a poor may not be able to, I mean, the poor people would have got the advantage of buying a cheaper product, and with lesser money they can enjoy the same benefit. But yes, if we ban it, we may be forced to buy a costlier one. In the long run, it is going to hurt our economy. It will be hurting our poor people more than the rich people. So and moreover, if you try to suddenly ban it right now, already the China, or if you are trying to boycott the Chinese products, what will happen is already the products have entered India, and already some trader has purchased it and is already in the market. Rather than boycotting it immediately, if at all we are talking about a boycott, then we should be boycotting it after some time. We should boycott maybe after 3 months, so that all the imported goods are over. All the traders who purchased it, they should be able to sell it. Then only, if at all we want to do that, we will be doing. Otherwise, you will be hurting the poor trader who might have imported some Chinese goods, or the shopkeeper who have already purchased these items and kept in the shop. And now if everybody goes for boycotting it, it is going to be a disaster for these those shopkeepers. A third point I would like to add here is, this will ultimately, if you are banning, because we are importing almost $74 billion worth items from China, and most of them are intermediary goods, not the finished goods. As I was mentioning, it is in the electronic goods, the electronic components we are importing, pharmaceutical ingredients we are importing, antibiotics we are importing. So it will be hurting the Indian producers and Indian exporters who are importing and then using it for export, or using it for the final finished product. So there is going to be more difficulty, or rather more hurt for our Indian producers and exporters who are using this. And it will be more costly, or rather their produce will become costly, and they may not be competitive in the international market ultimately. So it may be hurting the producers and exporters. So we have to be careful about this. And a fourth point I would like to add here is, this kind of a ban which we are talking and we are shouting from the rooftop, it may not be hurting China that much, because you look at the fact, for India's 5% of our exports are to China, which is just $16.5 billion. But what China is importing is less than 1% of their import. The $16.5 billion is less than 1% of Chinese import. And it is what we are importing, $74 billion worth item we are importing from China, that is just 3% of Chinese export. It is not going to make any difference for Chinese as such. Of course, some individual companies will be affected. It is not going to affect the Chinese economy or the Chinese export. 97% of the exports are intact. Only 3% of their export will be affected, or by banning some of these Chinese apps. 59 apps we have banned. Some individual companies may have some difficulty. They may lose some business. No doubt regarding that. It may hurt those 59 companies, no doubt regarding that. But in the long run, if you look, it is not going to affect the overall Chinese economy and all. It will be some individual loss for some of these companies. So, if at all, and moreover, when we say that we should, if we are really trying to hurt Chinese economy and all, then we should try to ban and we should boycott all those products which are using Chinese goods and Chinese labor. See, now I don't think we will be able to purchase anything, even an iPhone which we purchase, which is an American product, it will have lot of Chinese components in that. The Chinese labor will be involved in that. So ultimately, if you really want to hurt and all, we have to really look into where all the, see, the Chinese manufacturing is so widespread. They are involved in so deep into the whole manufacturing sector. It is almost impossible to identify where all the Chinese involvement is there and where all the China, the Chinese labor is involved, Chinese goods are involved. So it is not that easy to think about hurting them in the process. We will definitely be, our economy is much smaller, our export market is much smaller, and we can really be hurt because of the use of the Chinese goods as intermediary products much more than what Chinese may be affected by our boycott. So China's centrality in global trade and global value chain cannot be discounted that easily. If you discount and if you think that we can hurt them, that is a big mistake. We are not going to hurt them. We will be suffering a lot. Our poor will be suffering. Our middle class will be suffering. Why? Because we will be forced to buying a costlier Indian product or a Japanese product, and in the process we will be paying more from our pocket. So now, and moreover, another point, a fifth point I would like to add here: if you suddenly ban and if you suddenly boycott, and this will this will have a serious impact on investment to India, foreign direct investment to India. India will survive, China will survive, but India's credibility in the investment market, in the economic market, will be affected, because sudden change in the policy and a sudden reaction like this, all the investment plan by various people will be affected, and the foreign direct investors will have a second thought about investing in India, because anytime India may change the policy. If today we are hurt with China, tomorrow we may be hurt with somebody else. So if you go for this kind of a policy, sudden banning of the apps, many outsiders would plan to start their business in India will be thinking twice, should we invest in India, because India may emotionally take a decision. So we will be losing our policy credibility also, the credibility of the policy. If you say this is our policy, the outsiders may have a doubt regarding whether this policy will continue or not. So we may have a loss of policy credibility also. If we change policies overnight, no investor will invest in the long run. So we have to be very careful. And if we think of increasing the a sixth point I would like to add here is, if we are increasing our tariff, if your import duty, or if China also retaliate, it will be mutually assured destruction. That is the best word we can use, because it's a mad principle, mutually assured destruction. You increase trade, and so naturally it will affect our, the cost will increase here. You increase the tariff, the cost will increase here. China increases the tariff, the cost will increase there. So it is not going to benefit. In fact, the bottom line of any bilateral trade is trade benefits both. Please understand, trade not only benefits if I am as a manufacturer, I will benefit if I am able to export. But you as an importer, you also benefit. Please don't mistake this. See, trade is mutually beneficial. Both of us benefit. If we reduce the trade, both will be hurt. So there is no benefit as such. I mean, we have an economic, we can have a sentiment, nationalistic sentiment can be there. This can be the emotions within India. We should teach China a lesson through other means, but we may not be able to teach a lesson, and in the long run we may get more hurt than what Chinese may be hurt, because Chinese economy is much bigger and they can manage, because their import from India is just 1% and their export to India is just 3% of their export, whereas India's export to China is 5% and import from China is 14%. Definitely there will be an impact more on India than that of China. So coming to the final analysis of my discussion, can India economically challenge or economically hurt China? 2-3 points I would like to remind you. First point I would like to say is that this border dispute should be dealt as a border dispute, and if we are trying to convert into a trade war, it is unlikely to solve the border dispute in any case, and it may not be hurting China the way we want. So we should deal that as a border dispute. And of course, we need to put pressure on China. We should be standing firm along the border, and we should try to create opinion against China. We should increase our friendly relations with some of our neighboring countries, and China should affect our soft power skills should be used more. Everything is fine, but I think we should not be converting into an economic war, number one. Number two, considering India's and China's position in the global trade, India will definitely be more hurt than China, no doubt regarding that. Third point is banning all trade with China, if somebody is talking about that. And this may not be the right time to do that, because already our economy is in bad shape, and then this COVID came and our economy is going to shrink, and in fact a -5 growth rate, that is what IMF is predicting. So if you are further creating roadblocks in our bilateral trade with China, and I'm sure it will further affect our economy. It may not be a good thing to talk about, because our economy is already in a bad shape. And there is a surge in protectionism and anti-globalization ever since 2008, and this is, and it has been accentuated by the US President Donald Trump and many other protectionist nationalists which have come to power. And definitely it is going to affect the trade, and protectionism will affect the trade, and people will ultimately be hurt. Definitely, all I would like to say is that bilateral trade will benefit everybody. More trade, more benefit. That is the simple logic we should remember. It may affect some of the not so efficient industry. An efficient industry will always be beneficial if there is bilateral trade. It will increase the income, and it will increase the purchasing power of the people. All-round development will be there. No doubt this is going to be affected because of this, if we are talking about curtailment. And so bilateral trade will help in the efficient industries. Inefficient industries will be happy to ban it, but that is not going to help overall. So what needs to be done for India, that's the point we should know now. Rather than cribbing and complaining, we should raise our competitiveness. We have to become more and more stronger in our manufacturing. We have to increase our productivity, our performance, our efficiency, our infrastructure should increase, so that our manufacturing should be more competitive than that of Chinese or anybody else for that matter. So our focus should be to strengthen our basics, our infrastructure. And please remember, whenever we talk about a bilateral free trade agreement and all, we are struggling today because our manufacturing is very weak. Our manufacturing sector is very weak, and then even in the agriculture sector we are not doing very good. Our productivity is very poor, very less. Farmers are not getting even remunerative price. So when we open up the trade, we are unfortunately the free trade. You see, we opposed the RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership with ASEAN countries and Southeast Asia, mainly because our fear about our lack of efficiency and lack of productivity. So we need to strengthen our economy. We need to strengthen our manufacturing. We have to work on our education sector, our health sector. The COVID-19 has showed that health and education is a very important sector. We have to invest here. We have more investment, more competitiveness, more productivity, and in the long run, we will be able to compete with China. No shortcuts. And that is where India should focus. We should focus for the next 10-15 years, so that we can really be competitive with the rest of the world. Otherwise, we will have to grip and complain every time about countries like China. So in this border dispute, rather than focusing on, we should be stern, firm, but if you try to convert this into an economic war or economic strike, I don't think we are going to achieve the real fruits, except we get some brownie points in the domestic sector or the domestic market, or among our followers or the supporters of the ruling party. Other than that, we may not be able to get any benefit out of this.